Hi Pookies! Hello! Welcome back to another episode of the Blunt Muse podcast where we say things we were never meant to say out loud. We have our emotional support Teddy over here, and we have me, your host, Jen. Today, we are talking about purity culture. So grab your pen, grab your water, grab your notebook, and let us lock in. So, what is the purity culture? Purity culture is a belief system that ties a person's moral worth to sexual behavior. It frames sex as dangerous, dirty, or spiritually catastrophic outside very narrow rules. You realize how I have said a person's moral worth to sexual behavior, because normally a person's worth shouldn't be attributed to something as minute as sexual tendencies, but okay. So yeah, let me start by asking you something. Who taught you what purity means? Who taught you what being pure is about, and who benefits from the knowledge you have about purity? So, we are going to answer that question together. What is the purity culture? You see, we are deceived that purity culture is you should remain a virgin until you're married. That is not purity culture. Do you know what purity culture is? Purity culture is your virginity equals your value. Modesty equals your responsibility for men's behavior. For example, most people shun away from marrying women who are not virgins. Why? Because they're apparently not as valuable, it is not that big of a deal. And it's like, who equated our value to our sexuality? Who said we are valueless if we are not keeping ourselves until marriage? You get, like, why is our value tied to our virginity? And it is funny because purity culture is mostly imposed on women. So if our value as human beings equals our virginity, does that mean that men are valueless? Because so many men are not virgins. You understand? It makes no sense, Now, purity culture teaches us that modesty equals responsibility for men's behaviors, which is why when you hear a case of SA is sexual assault. So many people are like, alikuwa amevaa, alikuwa wapi, alikuwa kwa club, huyu alikuwa anaitisha. What do you mean? It's like if today mimi ni mtu wa mama mboga, right? Nivae suti, niende kwa a corporate office, niwaambie, you know what? Yeah, I am asking for it. Give me a job. Give it to me because I am clearly asking for it. I have dressed for the job, haven't I? It makes no sense. Honestly, I feel like the purity culture is just a chain that ties women down so that they can be a subjects to man, which is unfair, to say the least. The purity culture teaches that sexual desire is shameful, especially for women, which is why when you hear a woman with, let's say, a high body count, it's like, anajipoteza, alijipeana kwa wanaume. And it's like, why are you saying it as if this man didn't also have sex with her? It's like the issue with Bonnie Blue. There is only one Bonnie Blue and 1,000 men, but Bonnie Blue is the problem. And it's like, why? It makes absolutely no sense. Hi. Purity culture, it teaches that male sexuality should be excused. Ni wanaume who cheat. Why? Whose nature? Who said it's a man's nature to be unfaithful? Who said? It is this same people who are teaching purity culture who say those things. Actually, as a woman, it is your responsibility to safeguard your home. But if your husband goes outside the home, it is your responsibility to forgive him. You know, honestly, talking about the purity culture really annoys me because it ties women down so much, and it's like, what is the point? You know? Anyway, where does it stem from? Where does the purity culture stem from? It stems from religious roots, you know? The purity ideology is heavily tied to conservative interpretations of Abrahamic religions, you know? Christianity, Islamic, and what? These religions are the ones telling women to cover up. Unaonyesha babako nini? And it's like, simhonyeshi kitu, ya hana mabega. Rather, you know, purity culture emphasizes abstinence, modesty, pledges purity rings, and guarding your heart, you know. It emphasizes the need to be abstaining, you know, because save yourself until marriage. Your husband needs to find you ready for him. You need to save yourself. Imagine the joy when your husband has sex with you after your night of marriage, on the night of your marriage, and he finds out that you're a virgin. Imagine how happy he will be. Ancient patriarchal systems also emphasize the purity culture. It's also a root of the purity culture. Why? Because historically, in systems dominated by patriarchy, women's virginity was tied to property and lineage. Like, marrying a virgin was the go-to, which is why they were marrying kids. And it's like, the reason why they enforced this is honestly to hide pedophilia. I have no idea, honestly. But like, that is the stem of the purity. That is another stem of the purity culture, patriarchal systems. Another stem is culture. In many cultures, female sexuality was controlled to ensure paternity certainty. You know, a woman was not allowed to have more than one sexual partner because the child and the father, you know, they need to know whose child this is. And with multiple sexual partners, you wouldn't know who exactly is the father of the child. So that is why they enforced the purity culture. So in the past, in those cultural systems, marriage functioned as economic exchange, you know, and virginity was the guarantee. You have to be marrying a virgin, and when you do, it was like a business transaction between the family of the husband and the family of the wife, you know? Yeah. So basically, patriarchy engineered the purity culture, and religion amplified it. Now, is the purity culture a tool of control? Yes. Yes, it is. Why do we say it's a tool of control? It's a tool of control. What? Why do we say that? Because, you see, it regulates women's bodies. The purity culture tells you, usivae hivi. Unajua, when you wear tight clothes, they accentuate your hips, and it is not proper to be walking around with your hips showing like that. So that is you controlling what women do with their bodies. Usivae nguo inaonyesha bust. Najua uko na bust kubwa, and like you feel beautiful, you feel confident, but usivae nguo inaonyesha bust. What will people think about you? What will men say? Unajua wanaume wakikuona watasema wewe ni malaya. It is ridiculous. It is a tool of control. Why? Because it regulates social hierarchy and gender power. You see, the purity culture is mostly to shun women, to inflict shame on women, right? Now, this uplifts the other gender. The other gender is males. Because, like, I have power. I tell this woman what to do, and she needs to listen because I am the husband, and I say what goes. And it is ridiculous. Now, if you can convince women that their worth is fragile, their bodies are temptations, and their sexuality ruins them, then you don't need chains. You have established internalized policing, you know? Because this is what happens. You've already ushafunza huyu mwanamke that her body is something she is supposed to be ashamed of. Her body is something she is supposed to hide. Her worth is tied to her sexuality, which means once she has sex with a man before marriage, once she fornicates, she is worthless. She is valueless. When you do that, you teach the women that I need to protect myself. I need to safeguard myself. I need to do this to myself. I need to do that to myself. And it's like this, it makes your work easier as the one being in control, which is why I'm saying purity culture is a tool for control. Because once these women start looking at themselves, analyzing themselves, protecting themselves, being like, I cannot be seen hanging around with this man because ule mwanaume ataniona kama ninalalanga tu na wanaume. I cannot be seen talking to male friends because other males will think I am a slut and I be hanging around with me. Women are going to be conservative. But who is it benefiting? You know? Who is the purity culture benefiting? Is it the women? Of course not. One, patriarchal systems. Why? Because control of women's sexuality maintains male dominance in the family structure. Right? Because when you tell a woman, you know what? You're worthless, you're valueless. Now that I have married you and you are not a virgin, you're worthless to me. This inflicts shame on the woman. And you know, shame inakufanyanga you diminish yourself. And then the value of the man to you appreciates because he picked me even if I was worthless. Wow, that means he's really important in my life. Yes, I lack importance in his, but he is important in my life. You see, it puts male dominance on a pedestal. You get. Who else benefits from the purity culture? Religious institutions. Why? Because fear-based sexual morality keeps followers dependent on moral authority. Right? When they keep teaching you that sin, you are a sinner, you sin, you, oh my God, you slept with that person, you sinner, repent, seek forgiveness. You know, it keeps you constantly on the loop, on the I need to go to church, I need to repent, I need to be forgiven, I need to seek forgiveness, I need to seek guidance. Nimepoteza njia. You get? Now, who does not benefit from the purity culture? Once again, women, queer people. Why don't queer people benefit? Because they're constantly judged, they're constantly looked down upon, they're constantly stigmatized for their sexuality because it is contrary to what people who live by the purity culture believe. And so they look down upon these other people for being different. You get? Who else doesn't benefit? Survivors of sexual assault. With the purity culture, virginity is something sacred, something pure. Now, imagine a person who has been sexually assaulted by their preacher. You see, this is a person who won't speak up because, first of all, this is a preacher. This is a pure man of God. This is why will the preacher touch you? You get? That's the way society stigmatizes sexual assault victims, you know, blaming them. What had you worn? Oh my God, you had worn a miniskirt. We have come to the end of our episode. Now, if this episode made you feel uncomfortable, sit with this. If this episode made you angry, interrogate it. Why are you angry? Why are you angry? And with that, if this episode made you feel seen, share. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I will see you guys in the next episode. I love you guys so much. Bye.